They continue to see it as this kind of Western thing that's being imposed. And if instead they view it as something that comes from within their own historical lineage, then they don't need to see it as something being imposed, but something that is indigenous to their own society.
This is certainly very exciting. Yes, I really can't wait for that book to come out in February of 2011. I think it's going to make a very big impact.
Great.
We're sort of going into the second part of this interview, and really just interested to see how, or perhaps why, it has taken this long to provide a more inclusive and ultimately correct, in my opinion again, or perhaps our opinions, history of democracy. Is it because political theory or political history needed to get the stage? Did we have to depend on sort of a cosmopolitanism of intellectual work, sort of the translation and research that goes into bringing these documents from other cultures to perhaps to the English fora?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that that's a big part of it. Excuse me. I think that I'd probably argue that really this is not just about the history of democracy. More broadly, the entire social sciences and humanities is still very much grappling with the discourses that were woven into it during the colonial period. That is, as Europe is kind of conquering and supposedly civilizing, the rest of the world, the social science and humanities played a part of that machine. And as they played a part of that machine, they were embedded with these ideas of Western superiority and Eastern backwardness. Of course, this isn't new. This is very much, I take great inspiration here from the work of Edward Said, whose work on Orientalism and his other work really points to this idea that as colonial Europe was spreading out, it was premised on these assumptions, and these assumptions are evident in all kinds of texts. And he talks about visual art through to political discourse, through to novels, and so on and so on. And I think that we're very much still recovering from that period. The colonial period, it's often forgotten, only ended sort of 50, 60 years ago. And in some ways, we're still engaged in the colonial period. If you look at, occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan and so on. So we're not wholly disentangled from that colonial past yet. And the social sciences and humanities are still very much struggling with this idea, and it's embedded so much in all of the, it's taken as it's frequently in all of these different disciplines, taking their starting point from the assumption that the West has got it more or less right. And then if we can only make the others conform to our model, then the world will be a much better and safer place. So yes, it is partly a political project. Yes, it's partly about political theory, but political theory is not, we cannot isolate political theory and say, well, it's the only one that's ignored non-Western discourse. We would have to say that in the contemporary Western world, the entire collection of social science and humanities are embedded with these kind of stories, and that these stories continue to be problems. There's a lot of work left to be done, to unearth all of these non-Western stories, to unearth a different view of the world that doesn't take as its primary assumption that the Western world has basically got civilization right, and that the rest really need to wake up to themselves and meet us in the modern democratic, world. That instead we need to be premised on different assumptions. And these assumptions are not easily disentangled because they're embedded into the great array of discourse that surrounds us.
And now, what impact did John Keene's life and death of democracy have on secret history?
Well, Steve Stockwell and I have admired John Keene and his work for many years. We've certainly been in close contact with him over the last couple of years, and he's been very kind to us. He's given us a lot of guidance, and he's also contributed a chapter to The Secret History and to another volume that we're working on at the moment. So he's been an integral part of the last few years and how we've come about reaching this point with The Secret History of Democracy. However, I would point out that Steve Stockwell and myself had these ideas and were working on the ideas that are in the Secret History of Democracy for a couple of years before we were in touch with John Keane, and well before the release of The Life and Death of Democracy. So although our book comes out sort of 18 months after his, we've been working on these ideas for a number of years, and that it's not as if his book came about and then we thought we should put together an edited volume on this. It's just it seems to me that that the tide is turning, and that there are a number of different people right across the world, and some of them are in our volume, who are thinking differently about democracy and its history. And John Keane is one of the leaders of that movement, certainly. But we were very engaged with that idea from a number of years ago, and well before we had contact with John. So we're very grateful to him, and we continue to be inspired by him and his work, and it's very important work. And we're very grateful that he's been involved in our work and that he's very keen on what we're doing. But it's not as if our work is directly inspired by The Life and Death of Democracy. We're quite far along in terms of our development of this idea before The Life and Death of Democracy went to print.
This now concludes our interview with Dr. Benjamin Isakhan. From the members of the journal, we hope that you have enjoyed listening to this interview, that it was informative and pleasant.